Today, we welcome our second candidate for mayor, Brad Hart. Thank you for being here today, Mayor Hart. And please take a few minutes to introduce yourself, although it seems as though we already know you, and then also indicate briefly why you feel it's important for you to run for a second term. And then we will discuss the questions.
Great. Thank you, Gary. Thanks for having me here today. Brad Hart, I've born and raised in Iowa, Burlington, Iowa. And after undergrad, I moved to Houston, Texas, went to law school and lived there for 11 years. And our daughter was born, and the public schools are not very strong there. We kind of got tired of spending all our vacations back in Iowa at Thanksgiving and Christmas when the weather wasn't very good. So we decided we'd move back to Iowa. She'll know her family, she'll go to better schools, and we can vacation someplace fun. So we did that 31 years ago, and came to Cedar Rapids because it was a larger community than my hometown, and we've been here ever since. So it's been a terrific experience for us all the way through. I have two children. My son, Will, is in Denver. My daughter, Allison, and her husband, and my two grandchildren are in Geneva, Illinois. I'm running for re-election for similar reasons why I ran 4 years ago. At that time, I thought I was uniquely qualified to serve. In the then about 27 years I'd been in Cedar Rapids, I had been really an active volunteer to the tune of more than 20,000 hours. So I really had a good understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of our community. I also had served on and led almost a dozen nonprofit organizations, including the Chamber of Commerce, United Way, Young Parents Network, Alternative Services, Horizons. So I had kind of honed my leadership skills leading those organizations. And as a business lawyer, I'm trained to be an analytical problem solver. So whether it was for a nonprofit or the clients I served, trying to figure out how to move them forward, an issue forward, a project forward, the best, most effective way we can do that. And so I thought that training and that knowledge and the skills made me uniquely qualified. So I ran, and now I have 3.5 years of service as mayor, including helping to lead us through a pandemic and recover from the derecho. So I think I have the experience to continue to lead us forward to even greater heights.
And we'll talk more fully about those two issues in our questions. We have something in common, Mayor Hart. I too moved to Houston, Texas from Iowa in 1979 to do a PhD program in New Testament Studies at Rice University, and then moved back to Iowa in 1989 because we wanted our girls to have a better school system.
Yeah,
so
I understand.
We have a lot in common.
I just have to say that it may be my fault, but I do not recall getting these questions ahead of time, so just fire away.
Oh, excuse me.
It could have been me. They could have been attached to something, but you know what? I've done this job for 3.5 years now, and the experience I just talked about, I'm fine.
Okay.
Let's go with it.
And we are using the same 10 questions with each of the 3 candidates.
Sure.
So the first 2 questions do deal directly with the aftermath of the derecho. We have just passed the 1-year anniversary, and Tuesday's late afternoon mini storm was kind of an emotional gut punch to many of us as we remembered that day. The derecho really brought to light issues of affordable housing, homelessness, and food insecurity in Cedar Rapids. And as we discovered, a number of families were displaced from their homes, their apartments, and assistance was late in arriving for them or non-existent. What can be done to provide more affordable housing throughout the city? And what role, if any, does the city have in making sure that citizens have adequate food? So those 2 big issues of housing and adequate food.
Sure. Well, we continue to provide incentives for affordable housing projects, and we have dramatically increased affordable housing in the last 3 years in Cedar Rapids. We have developers doing affordable projects affordable housing projects from all around the country come into Cedar Rapids to do that, because they understand that we have a need here, and the city is really accommodating and easy to work with. The two new ones, the one from a developer in Indianapolis are down by Kirkwood, and they've already completed 2 of their buildings. They're building 1 or 2 more, and the great thing is they have storage units in the building outside, so families can park their bikes in a storage facility, not in their living room. The kids can have those amenities. And they also have 3 and 4 bedroom apartments, which is unusual for affordable housing. But that's what we really need for these families that have several kids. So they're all 4 or 5 kids sleeping in 1 bedroom. So that's an ongoing issue. We've continued to support affordable housing, and it has increased, and it will continue to increase. So I'm really happy with where we're going with that. Bringing in the Neighborhood Finance Corporation from Des Moines is really part of affordable housing, because the Neighborhood Finance Corp provides for low interest forgivable loans in our core neighborhoods. So people can go in, if they want to put a new roof on or put new windows in, and they can't get a loan at a bank, they can go to the Neighborhood Finance Corporation and get a loan. And if they stay in their home for at least 5 years, it starts to forgive. If they stay in 10 years, that loan is forgiven. And the city committed $1 million to that loan pool fund, and other banks and businesses committed money to that. And there's an $8 million pool of money for people to use who cannot get normal home improvement loans in our core neighborhoods. And that's affordable housing too. And we just recently announced that we're donating at least $1 million of the ARP funds for the patch program, because there were so many people. While 90 to 95% of the losses from the derecho had insurance coverage, unlike the 2008 flood, there are still many people who are underinsured and some uninsured. And we have to get people back safely in their homes. So we're really fortunate that Matthew 25 and the other organizations have already developed a patch program, and we are going to continue to support that so people can get back safely in their homes. And that's also an affordable housing issue.
Right, and we'll talk more about that in one of the next questions.
Sorry about that.
No, you're doing great, because this is all information that is interconnected. We can't just say one silo of money here doesn't affect how it impacts other areas of city life.
The food. Well, in a normal disaster, which the derecho was unlike any disaster we've ever had, because it impacted the entire city.
True.
And no one had power. Communication was almost impossible. Most of the streets were impassable. All of our traffic signals were damaged or destroyed. So it made it very difficult. Normally, the Salvation Army and the Red Cross handle shelter and food. The city doesn't handle shelter and food in a normal disaster. But because of COVID and because of the communication issues, and the Salvation Army had damage to its facility, they couldn't respond as quickly as they normally do. So the city opened up the shelter in Vets, and then the Salvation Army or Red Cross came a day later and managed that shelter for us. The city reached out to Barbecue Relief, and they came to the community and served like 70,000 hot meals. The city worked really hard to help coordinate the meals, and then we set up the neighborhood resource centers, the 5 neighborhood resource centers throughout the community, where people could get information. They could get information about services. They could get food. They get ice, water, other supplies, diapers. Just ways to reach out where people knew that they could go to that location. The one that I worked at was my church, St. Paul's United Methodist Church on Wellington Heights. And it was amazing, the people that came there for help. But it was also amazing the people who came to donate supplies. People would just pull in with their car or their van and lift up the hatch and unload cases of water and diapers and just food supplies. It was really remarkable. The food stuff, Feed Iowa First is playing a big role in that. Generally, health and food is more of a county issue. That's the funding from the state goes a little more to the county for those items. But the city, of course, plays a role in that, and we're continuing to talk and figure out how there'll be an after-action report that should be done already. It's not quite finished, but where we'll really identify the things we did well and the things that we need to improve on. And so we'll keep working on that. And food insecurity has been an issue for a long time, and we have team members who are trying to help deal with that and figure out how we can move those issues forward. We did establish another food pantry in the Ladd Library on the west side that wasn't there before.
Thank you for making the clarification that the city doesn't coordinate or doesn't handle shelters during disasters, but rather the Salvation Army.
And Red Cross, that's normally who
So
does
does the
that.
city coordinate with those organizations?
Certainly,
or-
if they need city facilities, then
Yes.
we coordinate that. The city did, because so many people were displaced, the city worked with hundreds of families to move them into hotel rooms. You know, there's always a silver lining. We were still in the middle of a pandemic, and so there were a lot of hotel rooms available. So we moved hundreds of families into hotel rooms throughout the city, and we're calling and finding apartments in nearby communities that hadn't had as much damage that might be available, and getting people at least safe and in under a roof somewhere. So that was an ongoing effort.
We'll come back to this issue of housing when we deal with the question of using funds from the federal government for pandemic recovery and derecho recovery. So, but I want to talk a little bit more about communication, because the derecho showed the weaknesses of our emergency communication systems. And what sort of disaster planning needs to take place to prevent a repeat of that inadequate response in communication?
Well, again, I saw some report the other day from Alliance that there's really no playbook for something like the derecho that, again, wiped out, as I mentioned, the streets were impassable, no electricity, there was hardly any way to communicate. Our public works drivers knew we had to clear the streets, so even though they couldn't really communicate on the routes, they went out and used the snow plow routes first, because they knew those were the arterial, those were the roads that we need to clear first in a snowstorm, so they must be the roads to clear first in a disaster like this, and use snow plows to push trees to the side of the road. So there were, and we have disaster planning, but in most cases, the disaster planning, you're able to communicate in some way. In the future, we will kind of establish not permanent sites, but we will let the community know, here's where our neighborhood resource centers will be. Here's where you know you can go to get information and to get supplies. We will, I think, create some kiosks at the grocery stores and anywhere else where we think people, the library, any place else we think people frequent. So everyone knows if they can't hear it, watch it on TV, and they can't get their Gazette, then they know they can go to these locations that'll be clearly identified, and they can get that information. We also were communicating with sheets of paper and in several different languages, and we were taking those to the grocery stores, and the police department, the fire department, area ambulance were handing them out. We had them anywhere we thought people might gather, so we could get that information out to people. But it was really, really hard. Certainly, the radio stations, most of the radio stations were on the air, and we were delivering to them every day information, updated information. And in your car, I heard them reading that, and I was so grateful. But we're really going to push people to be prepared to have a battery-powered radio, so that they know they can go and get that information by listening to, and we'll identify 2 or 3 radio stations who will be responsible for reporting that information at every half hour or every hour, anytime we have some kind of a disaster.
Yeah, with the electricity grid down, all of our digital devices are basically useless. So I noticed that that the city has established a neighborhood pact program.
Right.
Are you able to tell us a little bit more about, because that deals with the issue of communication?
Right, and it's really to build on the strength of our neighborhood associations. We have 10 or 11 registered neighborhood associations, and some are stronger than others, but the goal is to have all of them be very strong. And the city supports those to the tune of up to $10,000 a year for them to do their programming. We have a city representative, a liaison, who goes to every one of those meetings. We have a police officer who goes to those meetings to talk about what's going on there. So they're very important to us, and the PAC program it's prepare, I've forgotten that.
Prepare, act, communicate, train.
Yeah, so that, and that's part of this emergency training system that we're gonna do, and is to make sure people are prepared for potentially being out of power and out of communication for up to 72 hours, have a battery-powered radio, have water and some food supplied, and know where they can go within their neighborhood to get additional information, and have the neighborhood associations have a plan to how to distribute that information. So if we can get the information to the neighborhood association, we know that they will get it out to all their neighbors.
You mentioned providing literature, leaflets in different languages.
Yep.
And in a multicultural and ethnic community as we have, that is really crucial, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And
we
the
saw
city team
some
did that.
people with language barriers
Yep.
not being able to receive the information that they were seeking.
Right, absolutely. And we knew that, so we knew we had to have the information translated into several languages, because we want to try to reach everyone we could.
Great.
And we love the fact that we're a multilingual community, and we're becoming a more and more diverse community. That's wonderful.
Let's transition a bit from just the derecho into the pandemic response, and also includes some money for the derecho as well, I understand, from the federal government. It's estimated that the city of Cedar Rapids will receive about $28 million from the American Recovery Act, and 4 areas of focus have already been identified. Those areas are social services and housing, workforce development, west side flood prevention, and loss of city revenue. Do you think that those 4 areas provide equity and the help that citizens need to recover from the pandemic and the derecho?
Yes. The social issues are yet to be determined. We have such an incredibly strong nonprofit sector in the community that we are working with Lynn County and having those groups come with proposals. So there's no sense in us recreating the wheel, and let's get the eyes and the ears of all these nonprofits who are out serving our community. Tell us what's missing. Where should that money best be used? And so that's a really important component to this. And those proposals will be coming in, and we'll look and say, yeah, wow, we need to fund this, we need to fund this. And hopefully the county will join in with us on all of this.
Right,
certainly the county, we are working really hard with the county to put some money towards, significant dollars towards affordable housing. And we had a project that we thought was going to work up by my church, St. Paul's, but the neighborhood was against it, so we'll look for other places. But we're committed, as I mentioned earlier, committed to doing that. Will the city build a project and own it? No, and neither will I think the county. But we will create some kind of a partnership, maybe with nonprofits, to help fund the development of affordable housing projects. And the other social issues are the trailer parks. You know, they have a hard time.
Can you speak a little bit about that? Because that seems to be an area that is receiving less attention, but probably received a significant amount of damage.
Right. Yeah, that's a real issue. Many people in the trailer parks are buying their trailer on contracts. They don't really have title to it. So they aren't eligible to go, maybe not even qualify to get a bank loan. But they also weren't eligible for some of the FEMA money. They could do it as a renter, but they couldn't do it as a homeowner because they didn't have title. And unfortunately, some
Because,
people
yeah.
didn't even know they didn't have title. The other issue is, again, bank loans or the Neighborhood Finance Corp. That's a difficult process for them. Right after the derecho, with Matthew 25, I was one of those people out reinstalling skirts and saw that damage, and it was horrific, and the conditions people were living in. I love the fact, I think one of the proposals will maybe come in that a nonprofit group will maybe acquire one of the mobile home parks and clean it up. And I'm really excited about that possibility, and I will be very supportive of that.
Okay.
But yeah, mobile home owners, they either don't own it. Banks, normal lending organizations don't like to lend, especially on used mobile homes, so that's an issue. But we're, again, trying to work with the mobile home owners and the parks. But I think that's the solution is going to probably be from an area nonprofit, and I expect that the city will provide some financial support to that.
A tangent issue has to do with insurance companies sometimes delaying or resisting paying on those insurance policies to do the repairs. Some families are now finding themselves with mold because they couldn't get repairs done right away.
Right.
We're still waiting for repairs on our home a year later. So how is it possible that some of these funds could be used to help these families who are dealing with insurance issues that maybe are being refused payment?
Well, that's really what the patch program is to do, is for people who are underinsured or uninsured. And to the extent that list continues to grow, people who need help, and the community and the $1 million we've already committed aren't enough, for me personally, housing, getting people back in their homes safely is the number one issue. And so I would certainly support additional funds if we need to do that. I know some, like True North and some other agencies did some seminars for homeowners to say, here are your rights, here's what you can do. I know it's not about me, but yesterday we had shower stuff installed. So today was the first time I could take a shower in my bathroom. And about 3 weeks ago was the first time I slept in my master bedroom. And we still don't have gutters, and we still have all those other things. So I understand. We were better than most people because we had a kitchen, we had a bedroom, a guest bedroom in the basement, and a guest bathroom in the basement that were pretty functional. But the rest of the house, I get it. And luckily, our insurance company has been very good. But I have friends, and I've heard lots of kind of horror stories, and people who've had to hire lawyers, who've hired public adjusters. It's troubling. The city don't really see a role the city can play other than, again, through the patch program and these folks who can't get the repairs done and don't have the resources to do it themselves. I think they should go through the patch program.
Let's move on to another topic that's been in the news, which has to do with infrastructure. And of course, there will be a 1 cent sales tax on the November ballot that will be directed to the Paving for Progress program. And a nice piece came out in our Cedar Rapids this week on that project. Do you think that this is an appropriate vehicle, no pun intended, for funding street repair, and how would you ensure that equitable distribution of those funds is made to various parts of the city so that everyone benefits from it?
Yes and yes. It's absolutely. Before the Paving for Progress, the city was spending about $5 million a year on streets and borrowing that. Now we're spending about $18 million on streets, and we're not borrowing that money. 30% of the money comes from people who are coming into our city who pay no taxes, but they're driving on our streets. They're creating the wear and tear in our streets. It's the only way we can recover some funds from them. Cedar Rapids, like every urban community in Iowa, is behind on their streets because the state road use tax formula, the money that you pay when you get gas, has always gone more to the rural areas that don't have very many vehicles on them, more so than the urban areas that have a lot of traffic. It's always been that way, and it will always be that way because we're still a rural state. So almost every urban area, if not everyone, has adopted the local option sales tax and used all or some of it for streets. Plus, Cedar Rapids is an old community. We're in eastern Iowa. It's an older, so we have old sewers. And when we're repairing a street, we can't put a new street in and then have the sewer fail a year or two later. We have to do the whole project. And we have complete streets here. So our streets are not just for vehicles. Our streets are for pedestrians and for bicyclists. So we're putting in sidewalks when there aren't sidewalks. We're looking at all the areas that are missing sidewalks and figuring out ways to get sidewalks here for people that can be out and children can be safe. So those are really big issues. The first 5 years, almost 7 years of the sales tax, the Paving for Progress, we were working on our arterial roads because that's where the traffic is. Now, about 70% of that is going into residential areas. The state has a vehicle that we get to use every 2 years, and we drive all our streets, and it takes an infrared picture of the street and what's below it. So you might see a street that is being repaired, and you say, well, that street wasn't as bad as mine, but based on looking underneath it, that street, doing some work on it now is going to save money in the long run. And so we prioritize really based on the condition of the streets, and can we spend money wisely to maintain it, or do we have to rebuild it? We're not going to spend money if we're going to have to maintain it, if we're going to have to rebuild it soon after that. So more and more people will see the repairs and the street work being done in their neighborhoods, in all of the neighborhoods. And the projects are all listed. We have the projects laid out. That's why we need to know if the sales tax will be extended, because we plan these projects years in advance. And we need to plan them years in advance. Sometimes they're in stages. If we don't think we're going to have the money, 3 years from now, we might not start this big project because we can't complete it. We're not sure we can complete it. So it's getting significant percentage from people who drive our streets that don't pay any taxes. It's we're doing the streets that need the work done the most. And also, it's an economic development driver. Businesses looking at our community or looking to expand need to know we have the infrastructure. And it's more than just streets. It's certainly, do we have adequate water and other utilities that they need? But streets is also a big component of that.
Do citizens have input on which projects are done or how they're done?
Well, certainly they can look and provide input, yes. We were going to do a roundabout at Forest and Cottage Grove, and the community stepped up, and we had citizens, we had city staff look and meet with them and try to deal with a bunch of different issues, and did, and many of those citizens were very pleased with the communication and the effort. Ultimately, we are not doing a roundabout there because of the citizen input and the knowledge they gave us. So we always will. And when we have big projects in areas, we have meetings in those areas. We have public meetings in those areas. We also, the neighborhood association meetings, whenever there's a project coming or there's a project going on in the neighborhood, we provide updates on that. So the neighborhood associations are always aware of what's happening in and around their neighborhood.
Okay. Let's talk about another issue that's been in the news recently, and that is gun violence. There's a perception that there's an increase, and perhaps it's more than just a perception, of an increase in gun violence around the nation and in our communities. Do you have any thoughts on preventing gun violence in our community?
Well, our police department is a CALEA accredited police department. That's like the gold standard for police departments. And we're the only one in Iowa, and there were only about 50 in the country out of 17,000 police departments. And it means that we have gone through a rigorous process of an outside group looking at our training, our processes, our procedures, our hiring, everything we do. And we, the first time through, got full accreditation, which rarely happens. So I'm confident that our police department has the state-of-the-art processes and procedures and training. That's a big part of it. The Citizens Review Board that we just established is going to help. Wayne German is so frustrated because even the people, the victims of gun violence, won't cooperate. And that's so frustrating to him. It's just so incredibly frustrating to him. And if some of that is, I'm sure most of it is a fear of retaliation, but some of it is maybe some distrust of the police. So the Citizens Review Board is really intended to help build more trust in our police department and between the community and our police department. And that helps us all. That allows them to be more effective, and that protects all of us more. But the really cool thing that has just started in May is we have brought in the National Association of Safe Communities, and they have a program called Group Violence Intervention, GVI. And they've done this, had this program in about 25 other communities all around the country. In almost all communities, it's a small percentage of the population. In Cedar Rapids, probably 30 to 50 people who are involved in about 90% of the violent crime. The police often know who they are, but don't get people to provide, won't be a witness to that. So GVI goes out to, whether it's a custom notification where our police officer, someone from the GVI organization, and a community member goes out and visits, usually in their home, or we have group call-ins. Because of the pandemic, we haven't been able to do that. So they'll go into a home, and often the family doesn't necessarily know everything that's going on, and they start the conversation by, we're here to keep you safe, alive, and out of jail. And here, here's what you're doing. We know you're involved in this. Here's your next chance, your last chance. What do you need from us? Are there services you need? Do you need a job? How can we help you change this cycle? But if you go back into it, then we're going to call you up, and we're going to, all these charges, all these things we know you're doing, we're going to really work hard, and we'll get you off the street because you've had this chance. And what I had heard a couple weeks ago is out of the about 20 custom notifications that had happened for like the month after that, none of those 20 people had been involved in the stuff that they had been involved in before. That's a huge deal. I mean, this is really, really important.
Another approach besides just enforcement of laws
Yes.
is dealing with some underlying issues.
Absolutely. And in one case, I know in one case, they helped a young man get a job and helped him get transportation to the job for a while.
Please identify GVI once more.
Group Violence Intervention.
Okay, and is this a police department?
No, we brought this in through the SET policy board. Okay, so that was the other thing, is that the SET task force several years ago came up
Right.
with several issues and goals and actions, and then we had to figure out how to move those forward. Luckily, the Greater Cedar Rapids Community Foundation said, we'll play a role in this. So the city continues to fund the SET policy board and these activities. The county funds it, and the school district funds it to a lesser extent. And we provide funds to local companies who have programming for young people, but we knew we had to do more than that. And that's why when we found GVI and this National Association of Safe Communities, and we started working with them, and they're helping to administer this program. But the police department is absolutely a part of this, and Wayne German said, yes, and yes, we have to do this if it'll be effective. So people will start to hear more and more about that, but it's it's not that unique because it's been done in about 24 communities around the country. But in every community, there's been a significant decrease in violent crime. And we fully expect that to be the case here too.
Another big issue that could consume a lot of our time has to do with climate change. And we've experienced some climate disasters over the last few years, and we've seen a report that indicates that these will continue in frequency. What can the city do to address this issue of climate change? How would your city budget reflect that priority? And would electric vehicle charging stations be a part of that priority?
Well, Cedar Rapids was the first city in Iowa to hire a sustainability officer, Eric Holtos, and he's great. And so the city, kind of the low-hanging fruit that the city could do itself, we've done. We don't leave vehicles running. We're putting in solar where we can. We've reduced trash, all those things that we can do. But we knew that the city alone could not make a significant impact. So we are developing a community climate action plan. And they've been meeting with the community and business leaders, because it's important that we have, in many cases, the business the businesses are creating more of the issue than the homeowners are. So it can't just be homeowners, it needs to be, and so we couldn't scare the business community away. We need to bring them to the table too. So that plan is being developed. I think they met again Tuesday and developing this plan, and based on that plan, the city will take action. And to the extent that it will require some funds, and I expect the city will say, we're gonna use whatever funds, general funds, whatever we need to do to move these issues forward. And charging stations, I think that probably will be part of that plan. And I expect that the city would say, yes, we need to do that. But because that plan is being developed really with lots of community input and input from, the business community. And so I think there'll be a lot of buy-in. So that makes it maybe somewhat easier for the city to say, yes, we have to do this. We're going to follow this plan because the whole community worked to put this plan together.
There has been some resistance to solar power, industrial, or I think that's the term, industrial solar projects. Is that an issue that we need to address?
Well, the city has participated in a solar buying project so that the people in Cedar Rapids, including businesses, could get solar panels at a lower cost. So we've participated in that. We'll continue to do that. I think, so we know there's more to do, and that's why we have to have the Community Climate Action Plan. I think we're anxious for that to be finished so we can say, here's what we're doing, here's the priority, and we're going to do the first priority and move it on. But if there are easier things we can do, things that have already been identified, I suspect we're already doing those or working towards those. But the community action plan is really important, and I'm proud of the city for taking this initiative, and I'm proud of the community for going to those meetings and giving their passion and in many cases their expertise on this topic.
Great. The city over the past several years has been involved in attracting businesses to our community. And the city has offered various tax incentives to businesses and developers. And as we see a shift in population, is it becoming clear that there is a worker shortage and that we might want to encourage incentives to workers to relocate to Cedar Rapids? Should the city plan play a role in incentivizing businesses to pay higher wages or offer more attractive benefits for workers to come into our area?
We've issued building permits over the last 3 years of more than $1 billion in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Last year was $340 million in building permits, so there's lots going on. And we the state incentive and part of our incentive requires high wages. So
Okay.
people, they're entitled to more of an incentive, which is not, if they pay higher wages. And the state has a program that does that too. So there's already an incentive there for higher wages. Workforce shortage is a huge issue for everybody. I mean, it's been, frankly, workforce development has been an issue for 20 years. People don't understand all of the benefits of living in Cedar Rapids. So we have young people, college, I went to Houston, I went to the big city, I understand that. But when more and more people understand when they have children and they get a little older that coming back to the Midwest is important. And that's another reason why we have to have flood protection. It's why our streets have to be fixed. It's why we have to have housing options. It's why we have bike trails. It's why we have 94 parks, is to create the amenities so that people who come back will stay and to get people to come back. That's an important role for the city to play. Again, the incentives, we don't incent people for low paying. They don't get the same incentive if they don't have high paying jobs. So we play that role. The market itself is absolutely requiring businesses to increase wages.
And benefits for part-time positions, because I see a lot of new jobs that are part-time rather than full-time.
Right. Yeah, it's not really something the city cannot dictate how a business is run. But again, with the high-paying jobs, they get an added incentive. I think that the market is going to drive that, because my understanding that FedEx, which is now committed to building a $500 million or 500 million square foot facility down by the airport, and I think it's 420 or 450 jobs. About 350 of those are part-time, but my understanding FedEx provides benefits. That's how they get people. And what's going to happen is initially that's going to hurt some other local businesses who are already struggling for part-time people. But on the other hand, some of them will, in effect, be forced to provide more benefits for those part-time employees.
Workforce development is one of those 4 areas for use of pandemic relief funds. So are there plans on developing or to use those funds in developing our workforce?
Yes.
And where would those plans come from?
Well, they're in conjunction with Kirkwood. That's a starting point, because Kirkwood has always done such a terrific job. We're so fortunate to have Kirkwood in our community. And after the flood, so many people lost their homes, so many people lost their business was gone, so they had to be trained. Kirkwood has over and over again created certification programs, gone to businesses and said, what kind of skills do you need? And we will train people in those skills, and they'll get a certification, so then they can go and be hired. So we're working with Kirkwood on what's the need, how can we expand the workforce training. The other incentive, people probably know this, but it's been going on for a couple years now, the Earn and Learn, where it started at Nordstrom, and then Frontier Herbs did it, and I think another company or two has done this. So there are people who want to work, but they don't have enough English to pass the safety exam. So Nordstrom started it, and it was through Jasmine Almoyet, who was our economic development director at the city, and convinced Nordstrom to hire, I think it was maybe 10 to start with, 10 African nationals who didn't have the English language. They hired an interpreter to work beside them, and they paid them for 8 hours a day, and they worked for 5 hours a day, and Kirkwood came and taught them English for the next 3 hours a day. And we even provided transportation for them. And Nordstrom said, if they can pass, if they learn enough English in 3 months with this training to pass our safety exam, then they're full-time employees. I mean, that's the kind of initiative, so we help the business and we help these 10 employees. And I think they're doing that again. Like I said, I think Frontier Herbs did that. and some other organizations may be doing that. This is a chance for, and we also brought Urban Dreams to Cedar Rapids. Urban Dreams does mentoring and provides some training for youth, but they also work with people who have barriers to employment. Now is the time when businesses are almost desperate for employees. They'll take a risk on somebody. And so helping identify those people and working with the employers and say, okay, here's the barrier. People weren't even looking at this application because they had a criminal record. But let us make a phone call to a couple of these employees and say, here's what the criminal record is. Will you give this person a shot? So there are several initiatives that are already in place, and we're going to expand the workforce development again in coordination with Kirkwood. And there may be someone else who comes up and says, I've got a great plan, and we'll say, yeah, let's support that. But Kirkwood is our starting point, and those discussions are ongoing.
One potential barrier to employment is childcare availability. And we've seen in our community that availability being reduced. So is there anything that the city can do to increase childcare availability?
We have a really strong community development team who is really out. Jennifer Pratt and several others are really out there working always with our nonprofits, social service agencies to understand what the needs are. I will confess that I haven't been involved in discussions about daycare. It's been an ongoing issue. I know that. And the governor, didn't we just get an additional tax, an Iowa tax break for parents who are paying for childcare? But I know that Catherine McCauley is also working with a number of immigrants to get licensed to do in-home childcare, and that's a great program. Gives them some income and fills a need. So I can commit to reaching out to Jennifer Pratt and talking a little more about that. But to the extent the city can do that and incent that, maybe that will be one of the proposals that comes back, to have a community childcare center at least for several years to help get through this pandemic and through the derecho. And it seems like something that the city would seriously consider helping to support.
Another hot button issue that we're dealing with in America is race relations. And there continues to be a debate about whether systemic racism exists in our communities, in our state, in our police department. Can you speak to your position on these issues and what evidence you may have for your position? And would you support background checks or a review of social media accounts before hiring city employees?
Well, I think we might review social media accounts before we hire people already. I just think pretty much everyone does that, whether it's a checkoff on their employment application or not. I think that's pretty routine. Systemic racism, we certainly have systemic racism in our country. I mean, there's no question about it. Do I think our city and our police department, our fire department have policies and procedures that promote that? No, I don't think they do. Do we have people who handle a policy or procedure a way that might feel like systemic racism? They might use that policy or procedure that is intended to be completely neutral in a way that would be deemed systemic racism. Sure. I mean, but that's why having the police department CALEA accredited is really important. Our fire department also has accredited, and part of that is absolutely, discrimination and in gender and race and religion. I mean, all of that is. We have policies, procedures against that. The city is committed to hiring. We spend money every year on training for our police department, our fire department, and our city employees. We've committed to hire a diversity officer. We thought we had one, but the person wanted I think those jobs are in high demand, and they wanted more money than we could really pay in our pay structure. We're still a public entity. We have a pay structure that we can't just, so we're still working. We will do
So
that.
that's
Yeah, we
still
will
in the mix.
absolutely do that. So I think that, again, the Citizen Review Board is an important component to have citizens look at some of the policies and procedures that of our police department that people may feel create systemic racism, or I don't think they'll find that, but if they do, then we need to change those. And if they don't,
that will be the way to address those.
Yeah. Well, we're trying to address them all the time. If somebody complains, we look at it, but I think this will be a little more formal review, even if there hasn't been maybe a complaint. They're gonna say, okay, this is an area that some police departments have had issues with. Let's review the policy at Cedar Rapids. So we'll do those.
And does the city work with the NAACP and the Civil Rights Organization in these areas?
Yes, the Cedar Rapids Civil Rights Commission is a city entity. I name people to the Civil Rights Commission, and the council approves that. So we work with Stephanie all the time, and we have a pretty strong record. This is for LGBTQ, but we have for the last several years scored 100%, perfect score on the Municipal Equality Index scorecard, which means that we have the policies and procedures and the ordinances in place that we should have. And we also, there's so many. I mean, the Safe CR, the program that was started years ago to make sure that rental properties are up to code, and people aren't living in dumps, and that with landlords, landlords have to register now. They have to go to a class. They have to understand. And now we're going to inspect rental units a year earlier. It was either 2 years, and now we're going to do it every year, or it was 3 years, and we're going to do it every 2 years now, because we know this is important. People need to have a safe place. And I bring that up because that's certainly part of our Civil Rights Commission, the work that they get is people complaining about their living accommodations or not being able to find a place to live, and they may be based on race.
Okay.
So we're working hard at that.
We've covered a lot in a fairly short period of time. One last question deals with public transportation. Public transportation has never been widely used by Cedar Rapidians. Do you have any ideas about how to encourage folks to use our bus system, or ideas about other ways to expand public transportation?
Well, certainly that's why we do complete streets, so people can walk and bike. But our bus system was being used more and more. The numbers had gone up until COVID. Like, we a couple years ago, all students who have a student ID ride for free. We've expanded our hours. We've extended our hours into the early evening because we knew that was a need, and there was a cost to that, but we knew people had different work schedules.
Yes.
And so that was really important. And we knew that kids had programs after school that sometimes they went home and then had to go back to school. Well, we wanted to try to accommodate that too. So Brad DeBrouwer, who's our transit director, is passionate about that role, his role, and increasing ridership, and is surveying what's happening around the country. We're also applying for grants so that we can improve our buses and have more efficient buses. And we're looking. I don't think we're testing electric buses, but we're coordinating directly with Des Moines or another community in Iowa who's piloting a couple, and Brad is watching them carefully and talking with them about how's it going. So that's the future, and we'll get there. But I think once COVID ends, we'll promote bus ridership again. once people can stop wearing masks again. But letting the kids use the bus for free has increased our ridership and really helped those children and their families.
Any ideas about expanding service to Sunday, holidays, to encourage people to use public transportation just to travel on, besides for business or for going to the store?
I'm certain that we've looked at that, and it's a cost issue. We, about a year and a half ago, changed some of the routes because we knew the ridership had changed, and we needed to get more buses, more routes in certain areas of the community than we used to because ridership had changed. So we always look at that. It was significant hit to the budget to extend into the evening hours, but we just knew there was a clear need for that. If there's a clear need for operating on Sundays and on holidays, we'll consider it. But I don't think the need is it would be great if we could do it all the time, 24/7, but financially that's not feasible.
We have covered the 10 questions that we proposed. Thank you for responding thoroughly to each of those. Now we want to give you an opportunity. Is there something that we did not include in those 10 questions that you want to make sure that voters are aware of?
Well, that could be
in about 2 minutes.
Well, I'll go back to the anniversary of the derecho. I mean, it was horrific and it was unprecedented. People use that word, but it's accurate for this. Every citizen, everyone in Cedar Rapids was impacted in some way, in many ways. But this community stood up again. People, so many people, almost probably everybody in this community did something for someone else in the aftermath of that derecho, and many are still doing that. And that's the beauty of Cedar Rapids, and we did it after the '08 flood. It was maybe in some ways a little easier to do that because most of the community wasn't impacted. Here, it was more astounding that people stepped up to do that. So we're going to keep that effort going. The other thing we didn't talk about is the effort to engage the citizens. We have 31 boards and commissions, and that's a chance for citizens to give input, but it's also a chance for the city to gain their knowledge and their interest in these different areas. That was all the way from a plumbing inspection to Parks and Recreation and the Arts Commission, all of those things. And there wasn't a real effort to recruit people to that. People didn't know about that. So once I became mayor, I said, look, we've got to leverage the knowledge of our citizens. And so we put a brochure together that lists all of them. That wasn't available. It should have been, but it wasn't. And I gave that out to every group I talked to. The first year we increased the number of applicants by 38%. We also we created about a year and a half ago a municipal volunteer program, MVP program, to help identify and advertise and coordinate volunteer opportunities within the community. Because I know, and everyone knows, people who volunteer and give back to the community feel more connected. And they stay in our community, and they get more and more engaged. And that's really important. And there's a million other things. But final, I never left town after the derecho. That's craziness. I mean, it's a Facebook myth that people still recruit. I never left town. I was at the command center of the fire station every single day for the next 2 weeks while we were there. If I wasn't mucking out the sheetrock and the insulation in my house. It's crazy. And I didn't refuse any help. I didn't refuse the National Guard. What I said was, we probably don't need the National Guard to help us clear our streets because I was told, and it's true, the National Guard doesn't really have the equipment to do that. And because we'd already asked for help and the state sent 100 DOT truck drivers and their trucks to help do that, and because we retrofitted about 70 of our vehicles to do that kind of work, and we had a bunch of contractors that we already had contacted. So when the Army Corps came 3 days later, they worked with Alliant to restore power. That was their mission. and they could go back in there with their smaller equipment in smaller areas and work directly with the Lion. So we didn't refuse any help. We asked for all the help that we could get, but that's been misquoted. So I appreciate the opportunity to clarify that.
Well, thank you, and thank you for taking time to be with us and responding to our questions. Thank you to our audience who has been listening, and Mayor Hart, congratulations. Hopefully you'll have a good campaign as we look to the fall.
Thank you.